Welcome to Playing Above the Line, where we interview entrepreneurs, business owners, and community activists to get their thoughts and perspectives on leadership. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group, a business consulting and accounting firm focused on preparing clients for the future through innovation and positive growth. Welcome to another episode of Playing Above the Line. I'm your host, Alan, and I'm very excited to have Eric Friese as our guest today. And Eric is the owner of Soul Caffeine. But I'll tell you, as excited as I am to have you, Eric, there's no comparison to what producer Carrie is feeling over there, because I do know that Soul Caffeine is her favorite coffee shop on the Eastern Shore, and probably maybe in the whole world. She likes it a lot. So we're happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So Soul Caffeine's a coffee shop. What's the genesis? I mean, how did it come about? Have you always wanted to be a coffee shop owner? I mean, what happened there to make that
not at
happen?
all. I mean, yeah. I've been a coffee addict, for a very long time, right?
Yeah.
So I grew up in a household where, there's pretty much always a pot of coffee on somewhere, right? So, I think the genesis of Soul Caffeine was actually alignment of two different dreams. So we lived in Washington, D.C. for a while. Myself and my wife, Mallory, she worked at a commercial bakery, right? So, and she's always kind of had that dream of doing a bakery coffee shop. And once we moved back here, we started having kids. We essentially got really close with some folks at church, Gabe and Lynn Holloway. They were our pastors, and they shared a dream they had for mission and a coffee shop, right? And so we it was kind of funny. It was I think in November around Thanksgiving, we had a few times we were hanging out just kind of chatting about it, and then on New Year's Day that 2016, we decided we're not getting any younger. Let's open a coffee shop, and Soul Caffeine opened about 3 months later. So it happened that quickly.
So I never really asked this direct question. We've had a lot of entrepreneurs on the show, yep. And I think that sometimes we just kind of take for granted that these ideas, pop in people's heads and all of a sudden, poof, they become reality. But I've got to think that there's some sort of, I know there's a lot of planning that goes into it, but I mean, can you kind of take us through the thought process and the planning stages of determining that, number one, okay, this is what I want to do, and you kind of explained that, but number two, it's viable.
Right. And
then number three, how are we going to, cash flow it, make it work, and that kind of thing. Can you just kind of speak to that for a few minutes?
Well, I think we would call it God-led timing, but it was just really like a lot of things kind of hit at the same time. My professional career, I was reaching a place where I was kind of rethinking where I was going with my career, and really taking some hard looks at how my life was aligning with our missional journey in life with our faith, and essentially through those conversations, we decided we wanted to do this. But after we decided, this is a great idea. Besides working at a mom and pop pizza place when I was a teenager, didn't have a ton of food service experience. So, there's a lot of, looking at building a business plan, right? So it wasn't my first business. It was my first brick and mortar food service business. Okay. But, so putting together a business plan, trying to find a good location, for us, we had to build out a space, right? So that was something that we had not done, working with the health department and having to work with city inspectors to make sure we've got all the stuff there, right? And then managing the build out, right? So, it was a lot. There was a lot of places we could have failed, right? And we're very fortunate that we didn't, because we tried our best to be intentional in planning and things like that. But it was really a day by day learning process for us to not only figure out how to run a food service business, but also just how to build a business in general, building a staff, figuring out business models, working on all the metrics that you need to make sure you're running a successful food service business, and then building a staff that's going to produce good quality product, right? So it just happened.
And I'll tell you what, food service, you're right. Restaurants, I mean, any kind of that type of business is not, it's not an easy road to hoe, right?
No, it's some of the hardest money I've ever worked for.
And a lot depends on your team, I would imagine. I mean,
absolutely.
I'm assuming you're pretty involved in the day-to-day operations.
Sure. I think we've been able to pull back a little bit as owners, over the last year and a half. But, before that, myself and my wife, Mallory, we were there probably 60, 70 hours a week, right? Doing that part of it, right? But the more that you're there and behind the bar and in the operations, you can't be thinking about the global aspects of growing your business, right? So we started working on a plan of getting our hours reduced actually in the cafe and spending more time out in the community and building and planning and things like that.
So you got to, I would imagine, put a lot of trust, and this is true for any employer, but especially in the food services business. You've got to place a lot of trust on your employees, and I would imagine your management group and that kind of thing. So what do you look for when you're hiring someone to be a part of what's got to be a very dear business, because you started from scratch, so it's very dear to your heart, I'm sure. So what are you looking for in an employee whenever you're looking to bring somebody on board?
The biggest thing we look for is alignment to our mission, right? So we spend a lot of time asking questions like, what do you do in your off time? If it's a high school, college student, what clubs are you in? That kind of thing. We have to be careful about some of those questions we ask, right? Equal opportunity, but we go and stalk Facebook and kind of see how things are. But our biggest thing is trying to call references, try to find out that we have a good picture of who this person is, because if they align with our mission, I can teach anybody how to make coffee, great coffee, right? We have really good training processes to make sure I can get there. But if they don't align with our mission and our staff, then right off the bat, it's going to be oil and water, right? So we spend a lot of time making sure there's a good fit there.
Okay. And so the mission of Soul Caffeine, and I should say Soul is SOUL.
That's right.
Soul Caffeine,
Soul.
right?
That's right.
So the mission of Soul Caffeine is what?
So we like to call ourselves a community-focused coffee shop, right? So the intent being is that, our job, is we want to make great coffee, right? But the whole part is building an atmosphere where people essentially want to come and be and get to know each other, but also impact our greater community, right? So, there's a book out there called The Great Good Place, and it's actually an author that lived in Pensacola for a little while, but he was kind of like an anthropologist, and essentially, his theory was that Americans had lost the idea of a third place, right? So if you look back, like in European cultures and even American culture in the early parts of our country, you would go to work, you had home, and then you usually had some place that you would go, like after work, whether it was a pub or something like that, right? And connected with your neighbors, connected with other people, and really got some time just to kind of enjoy things, right? And our culture is moving away from that. We spend more time in front of the TV and on social media. The idea being is that we're trying to create third place where people can come and try to get folks to actually sit down. There's something magical about coffee, right? You just kind of open up and you chat, you enjoy it. It's something that makes you feel good on the inside. And that's essentially what we want to do with Soul Caffeine.
Gotcha. Well, it's interesting you say that because we had a guy on a couple of weeks ago, Taylor Atchison, and his family's company goes into urban areas, specifically urban Mobile, and they rehab these older structures and that kind of thing. And one of the things that he just did is they redid an ice house, and so it's the Icebox Bar, right? And so it's the idea of that neighborhood bar, like you talked about. And I mean, what is it about society today that makes everyone long for that third place? And that's something that I think we got away from with urban sprawl and people moving out of the downtown areas, to the suburbs and that kind of thing. But people seem to be really kind of longing for that connection again. Is it just because people want a human connection and that's a good way to do it? I mean, what do you think that is?
I mean, I think we all kind of thirst for some type of connection to somebody that's not ourselves, right? If you're an extrovert, you want to be in a group of people. Yeah, if you're an introvert, you want to be with your close friends, but being able to have really deep, engaged conversations. So having a place that's going to be able to do both of that. But I think, in general, Americans, this is just my opinion, I think we work too much. I mean, way too many hours, at work. And then when we go home, the type of time we're spending isn't always time for us to really kind of slow down and rest. So I think that's one thing that third place can help you do is some folks use it to get, productivity. They want to get focused work done, which is great. But, being able to sit down and just have a cup of coffee, and just talk. I mean, for me, the personal connection is, I spend so much time with my mom, like whenever I sit down with my mom and talk about, there's always coffee there, right? We're talking about life, and whether it's just reminiscing or me asking for advice on how to parent my children, there's always coffee involved in that, right? So I think I've always had, an association with sitting down with a cup of coffee and trying to, figure out life.
So let's talk about your mom, and you have a great line in your informational sheet that you gave us, but it says, we asked who a leader is that you admire, and you said my mom. She's not a titan of industry, which I love that. Yeah. But I mean, you said that you wouldn't be where you are today without her. So what has she taught you? How has she mentored you in your, not only, personal life, but also professional life? What have you learned from her along the way?
Well, it's funny because my mom is, like I said, not a titan of industry. She hasn't had this big, corporate career or anything like that. But in my opinion, she has a life well lived. So she, hasn't had a, she came, from essentially like a farm family, right? So it was all, they didn't have a lot of money or anything like that. Big family, from Stapleton over in Baldwin County. And, she, had to overcome a lot of rough periods in her life. And she's always just kind of done it with a smile. And, I think that, the way she approaches work ethic, I think, that's a big part of who I am, is knowing that, 9% of any kind of success is showing up and being willing to get your hands dirty. And that's always kind of been her approach as well. She has that expectation that, you should work hard, right? And that there's something that's important about that in life. And And I think that, is that she works hard, and then when it's time to, have fun, she has fun hard too. Right. So, she's always been this loving, positive experience in my life, regardless of whatever kind of bad things have been happening, in life. She's always been very positive. And I think that's been a really good, influence on me that I try to pass on to my kids.
Yeah, I think that's great. You mentioned always a pot of coffee with your mom. My grandparents had these next door neighbors for years and years, Ruth and Joe, Billy, and I don't care when you went to their house. It could be at 7 o'clock in the morning or at 11 o'clock at night. There was always, and I mean always, a pot of coffee on. And they would always offer you a cup of coffee. Even, I was, 12 years old. Like, hey, you want some coffee? No, I'm good. But it was, it was one of those things that I think you're right. And that's one of the things I remember about them. They were great people, but yeah, they were huge coffee drinkers, which I think is interesting. Like you said, a coffee shop or a neighborhood pub or whatever. It's just something that's always, just causes people to open up. And I think that's great.
Yep.
So you also mentioned Abraham Lincoln and Elon Musk. So what about them? Obviously well known in historical figures, Abraham Lincoln, of course, and then Musk is, quite the successful business person, it would seem. So, what about them do you admire?
Well, I think, Abraham Lincoln, for me is, he's a really interesting character in our history because, first of all, as a political candidate, most folks didn't like him as a candidate, right? So for him to become president, it actually took a lot of, interesting things to happen for him to even get there, right? Because he wasn't this big, cult of personality type of leader, right? But he's exactly the leader that we needed whenever the Civil War and all this stuff happened, right? And it seemed like he was willing to do whatever it takes to preserve that union. And, he really did have a sense of thinking about us and not I, right? So, you don't see a whole lot of Lincoln out there vilifying the South or anything like that. It's like, we need to fix these rights and we get to do this together as a country. And if we are going to go forward as one unified United States of America, then we've got to fix some of the roots of these problems. And he was willing to make some really hard decisions to make that come together, right? And I think that's to me, a substantial leader. It'd be a lot easier for him not to do that, as a president, right? But he didn't. He did what had to happen. Elon Musk to me is a really interesting guy, but being my background before coffee was actually an engineer, right? Okay. So essentially, what I love about him is I think he really personifies the idea that you got to show up and work hard to make something happen, right? So if you look at Tesla and their electronic car design and stuff like that, Ford, Chevy, a lot of people have been trying to push electronic cars, for years. So it wasn't like a technology problem. But he figured out some ways to spend more money essentially on finding better battery designs to make it more acceptable for people, and he made it cool. Right. So that was, to me, that's where, Tesla as a company has done some interesting things. And, he literally he's like this Edison, he's this generation's Edison, right? So he's going to make changes in how we live our life every day that's going to be impacted for generations. I think that's really neat. Yeah.
That's great. Engineer to coffee guru.
Yeah.
That is okay. Very cool. We've kind of touched on this in a broad term, I guess, but obviously with an organization that you have people that you lead, right? And so this is a leadership podcast in an overall sense. So give me just your general thoughts on what a good leader is and some qualities that you see in yourself maybe, or that you have seen in others that have led you along the way.
Sure. So, like I've said, I think a lot of when it comes to leadership is being willing to do the hard work too. Mm-hmm. So you can't just say, hey, we've got this hard problem, you guys get to work on this, right? That's not right. Leadership, right? Yeah. So the whole idea being is that, being able to be there and inspire people with your personal leadership, getting there and tackling hard problems. And I believe that, the other part of that is essentially communication, right? So that's like the two main places where I feel that leadership is so important. Communication, being able to, there's really no use in being a visionary if you can't communicate what that vision is. Yeah. Right. So you've got to be able to break those big visions into pieces and be able to inspire people to do the hard work, because nothing big and substantial doesn't, you can't do it in 6 months, it's years, right? So you've got to be able to commit to that work and communicate what the end goal looks like, and be able to feel like they have ownership in that, right? So it's got to be a lot more than just, hey, you guys work for me on a weekly basis, right? They got to have ownership and feeling what they do so they can take pride in the product that you built. Yeah. You're not the first person that mentions vision and then the importance of sharing that vision with the people who are part of your organization that you're leading. I think there's sometimes a disconnect in the visionary and then the people who are on the front lines that it never gets communicated. Right. And it's very important for them to know kind of where you're headed, right? Right. Yeah. So, all right, talk about vision. So 5 years down the road, where do you see Soul Caffeine? What do you want to do in the next few years? With Soul Caffeine, normally I'm like a 5-year plan person, right?
Okay.
Like I know what I'm doing. I've got metrics to measure that, right? So like me as a person, that's the kind of person I have. But Soul Caffeine has taught me some lessons that, you need to be a lot more qualitative than quantitative, sometimes with your business stuff. So, we focus a lot more on, I think, more qualitative metrics for Soul Caffeine. Mm-hmm. Do we have a staff that's, closely integrated? Do they like being there? Right. We focus a lot more on making sure that we have our customers that are happy and that we are producing good, consistent quality product. The 5-year plan for Soul Caffeine really is, we have different success metrics, I would say, than a lot of other like traditional businesses, like number of locations or, stuff like that. While we do, think about opening more Soul Caffeines, we're a lot more concerned about, I think, keeping what we've got good, mm-hmm. right? So we could go and open 5, 6, 7, Soul Caffeines if we wanted to, but we know that would, honestly, I think my biggest fear, it would cheapen the experience.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that, at 5 years in Soul Caffeine, I think you will see more locations, right? Because I think we've got something good going. But really, we were more focused on making sure that we're maintaining what we've got good. And, if it's convenient for us to do locations and it matches with our mission and it matches with what we're doing, we'll move forward with it. But we're not going to use I would say the more traditional business measurement practices for us doesn't always measure success when it aligns with our mission.
So you mentioned metrics, and I'm just curious. Obviously you place a very, very high premium on, I'm going to use the word quality of employee or the kind of person that they are and that kind of thing. So, and I would imagine, I think I'm pretty spot on when I say that the turnover rate with employees in food services businesses is pretty high. I would think. I don't know what the average is, but I imagine it's on up there. So how have you seen your turnover rate compared to, maybe the industry average? Do you keep up with that? And do you think that, do you see that the way that you kind of engage your employees has paid off in retaining quality employees?
Absolutely. So, for us, it is something we pay attention to because it is a metric that gauges how well our staff is, being cohesive mm-hmm. and they like spending time together. But I think our churn rate is much lower than the traditional food service. Up until this last May, I had a bunch of folks graduate and stuff like that, go on and do big life things last May. But I had people who had been with me for 3 years. So, wow. I think right now, we do have some new folks on staff at the moment, but I have folks that have been with me for 2 or 3 years, so we have a pretty low churn rate mm-hmm. when it comes to doing that stuff. And we're generating a lot of applications, folks that want to work for us, and they're good qualified applications that come through, right? So those are all really good indicators that we're doing what we need to do. Yeah. We're attracting people to our business that already align with us missionally. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are already customers. Right. They just love it so much they want to come work for us. And our staff, and that's the one thing, if I can't plug anything for my business, it is my staff. I'm just one guy sitting here in a chair. My staff is absolutely amazing. It is by far the biggest asset that Soul Caffeine has mm-hmm. is that God has sent us people that they love Soul Caffeine like it's their own, and they love the people that walk through the door every day. And it's just the most wonderful thing to see. And I'd love to take credit for that, but it's not me. We try to, our best to make sure with training and things, stuff like that is going on. But, the folks that work for us, they love people and they love coffee. That's our tagline. And they were that way before they walked through the door. That's cool.
I think what you're saying is a great lesson. And I'm a firm believer that no matter who is listening to this particular episode, they may not be a coffee owner, but people can take tidbits of information and wisdom, I guess, from every episode that we do. I firmly believe that. And I think that what I'm hearing you say, employee engagement is important.
Sure.
And that's something I think a lot of people kind of miss the mark on. They don't necessarily engage their employees in the way that they need to be engaged. And I know that you working with a bunch of millennials or maybe what's the next iteration, Gen Zers or whatever they...
Zennials or something like that.
Something like that. So, what makes them tick is different than if you were working with a baby boomer or a Gen X person, right? So I think that's a key to make sure that you are in tune with what makes your employees tick and make them happy and engage them and make sure that you do that. So
absolutely. From an owner's perspective, they really are your biggest asset, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're not pouring back into your employees, you can't be in your business every single day and be the face to every single customer, right? So if you can't inspire folks to live your mission and to show that to customers every day, then you're gonna fail your business, right?
Yeah. So one more thing before we kind of start wrapping up, I wanted to point out, and I think you're the first person that's really kind of said this in this way, but when I read it, I was like, man, that's very very insightful. So one of the things that you said is that being a leader can be lonely and isolating.
Right.
And I think that's something that we haven't really touched on at all but I think it's absolutely true. So expand on that a little bit, and maybe how do you kind of deal with that and maybe mitigate some of those feelings of isolation that you are bound to feel when you're making, these big decisions that are going to affect you and your family, but also the people that you employ?
Well, I think as leaders, especially if you're an owner of a company, you're essentially the person that's leading an entire group of people. And I think the idea that we've got to personify a strong leader, right? To basically push a message of confidence for our people. Like, we're a strong business, we're doing great, we're achieving all our goals and a mission and stuff like that. And especially, I'm an introverted person, right? So like sometimes acting like that is kind of exhausting. But I think that a lot of leaders. For me, where I first started learning this lesson was not with Soul Caffeine, but with pastors, right? Because pastors at the front of church, and they're having to put on, essentially a certain face every Sunday to do that kind of stuff and try to lead that. But they're just people too, right? Yep. And it gets exhausting, trying to be, all these things to all these different people, right? So I think it's super important for owners to have. It could be professional therapy, or it could be just, friends, somebody you can go and be honest with. Like, I feel like my business is failing right now, right? And just being able to talk, like my buddy's the owner of Lenny Subs and Daphne, Andy McGee. We call it our small business support group. But we get together at least once a week and usually have coffee and kind of talk about things that are happening. But, out of those meetings is a lot of laughing. Sometimes it's commiserating, but, it's just trying to, share with other people that, what you're going through and being able to be real. Because, a lot of times they can't help you fix, your problems in your business, right? But you're able to talk about it and feel a little better, and get it off your chest.
Yeah. I 100% agree. When I was first in this accounting profession, I worked at a public accounting firm, and I was really, my first tax season, I was wondering what I'd gotten myself into. I thought I had made the bigged mistake in my entire life, because I was like, I have no clue what I'm doing.
Right.
I'm working a bazillion hours a week. These people are telling me what I'm doing wrong every single day. I mean, I have made a huge mistake. But there were a couple other guys that, young like me, and we worked together. And so we had what we called our board meetings every couple times a week. So we'd go to this Mexican restaurant after work and have some margaritas and, eat and talk about our failures for the day or whatever. And it really is amazing how connecting with someone on that level can help you get through those tough times. And so not only for business owners, but for if you're an employee or anything that you're going through, if you're having those, those feelings of doubt or failure or whatever, connecting with someone else to kind of talk through those things is very important. That's very, very cool.
Absolutely.
I like it a lot. Okay, so before we wrap up, you mentioned the one book. Any other books that have made an impact on you as far as your leadership philosophy or just in life in general?
I think I'm a pretty eclectic reader. So I try to read a lot of different stuff. But big fan of Jim Collins' work. Good to Great, Built to Last. I don't think I've read all those books. He's a data-driven person, and so am I. So I love that. But I think the one book that actually more resonates with our time at Soul Caffeine is an author. His name is Bob Goff, and he wrote a book called Love Does. And so it's essentially the idea that love is a verb, and that needs to be essentially personified by action. And it's a great book because if you look at your life not just as your every day is a mission. If you're a faith-led person, every day is a ministry. What you do every day around the people around you, and that's this whole thing is that we were charged to love each other. Whether whatever faith you follow, the world would be a lot better place if we loved each other every day. Right. So that's kind of the whole idea. Yep.
Like it a lot. So I hadn't asked this question in a while, but if I go to Spotify, iTunes, your presets on your radio, what do I find there?
Well, again, that's going to be an eclectic fix, but so I'm a big fan of blues and kind of classic rock and stuff like that. I'm a guitar player, right? Okay. So I like Stevie Ray Vaughan's usually pretty heavy on my rotation. I like B.B. King and stuff like that, right? So it kind of depends on the feel. Sometimes that it could be something a little lighter, something a little heavier, like rock and stuff like that. The thing I love about Spotify is they have like Discovery, right? So like whatever every week they update their playlist. I love going through that and see what kind of fun stuff Spotify found for me to listen to.
Lets you know just how weird your music taste is.
Exactly.
All right, so last question, and I ask this one quite often, but I really love the insight that it gives into just kind of where people are in their head. So at the end of your life, your children, your grandchildren look back and they talk about Eric Friese. What do you want them to say?
Well, I hope that they saw how much I valued my time with them, right? And I hope that they realized that, I really, I did not live for my work. I really did live to try to, provide life for my children. But I hope they also saw that whatever I committed myself to do, that I gave my all to it, right? Mm-hmm. So I tried to be intentional with the things I chose to do with my life, and that when I did choose to do something, I put my brand on, and I'm willing to, go out and make things happen, right? So I hope they see, the ideas that my mom instilled in me and work ethic that gets passed down to my kids. And they could see that things weren't always happy, but it'd still be joyful times when things aren't great.
I love it. Love it a lot. Eric, thank you so much. Folks can go to soulcaffeine.net and check out Soul Caffeine. We've got the rest of your social media for you personally as well as Soul Caffeine and our show notes there on the episode page. So, Eric, thanks so much. This has been great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.
So we'll kind of start, I guess, in present day and then work back if we need to. But so Soul Caffeine, I mean, it's I know before the show we talked, you had it for about 4 years. So what was the genesis of that? How did you end up owning a coffee shop on the Eastern Shore?
Sure. I think it was kind of the genesis of a few different dreams. So my wife, Mallory, and I, who's my business partner, we lived in Washington, D.C. for a period of time, and she was a commercial baker, right? So she's always had this talent for baking and a dream of doing a bakery coffee shop. And we moved back down here and started having kids. We started getting real close with the pastor of our church, Gabe and Lynn Holloway. And the closer we got, we realized that we had a common dream of doing a coffee shop. Theirs was more ministry focused. Us was just like, hey, we like coffee and pastries. And so we essentially, decided we're not getting any younger. And so we I think it was around Thanksgiving, and we had a few more conversations. We met on New Year's Day in 2016 and said, okay, we're not getting any younger, let's do this. And literally, Soul Caffeine opened on March 13th, just a few months later.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. It definitely helps us in the ratings, and it also makes it easier for other folks to find the podcast. As always, a big thanks to producer Carrie Wolf and editor Johnny Glenn. Playing Above the Line is sponsored by Aviso Group. If you want to know more about who we are and what we do, you can visit our website at avisogroup.com. That's AVIZO group.com. You can also check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening.